Right, going to look at chapter 3 of My Men today, because I know that some of you have got an exam on Tuesday and you're freaking out. It's going to be okay. We're going to get to the end of the book. It's all going to be fine. You're going to learn your key quotes. You're going to ace the essay question. You're going to do your extract. It's going to be brilliant. So let's have a look at what happens in chapter 3. We're in the bunkhouse again. I've chosen a bunkhouse-like location next to the wood burner. Doesn't really work, but whatever. And this is the section where they've come to the ranch. They've actually gone out and done some work in the afternoon. And they're sitting in the bunkhouse chilling out. To begin with, George and Slim are sitting around playing a few games of cards. And Slim, who's, we've talked about it before, godlike, prince of the ranch. He's got this calm authority. He says to George, funny how you and him string along together. George is immediately defensive. What's funny about it? Because we've talked about this before, the idea of loneliness, and that everybody in this environment, these itinerant workers, are just doing their own thing. They're all by themselves. They don't connect with anybody else. So it's so unusual for George and Lenny to have a friendship that everyone is suspicious of it. The boss thinks they're trying to, that George is trying to pull one over on Lenny, that he's trying to take his money. There's all kinds of little theories about why it is that they're together. But the fact is, because they support each other and they're friends. And George justifies it to Slim. He says, I've seen the guys that go around on ranches alone. That ain't no good. After a long time, they get mean. And Slim agrees with him. He says, yeah, they get mean. And the idea is that they get wanting to fight all the time. Well, in this chapter, we find someone who gets wanting to fight all the time. And that's Curly. Now, he shouldn't be alone because he's got a wife. But their relationship is so dysfunctional that even though they've been married 2 weeks, his pants is full of ants, and he's still very, very aggressive. So obviously hugely frustrated. That's a whole nother issue on the relationship between Curly and Curly's wife, and what you think of Curly's wife, and whether she's a tart, whether she's a nice girl. We'll maybe come back to that another time. Anyway, and George starts to confide in Slim, and he starts telling him about what happened in Weed. It's the first time that we've found out about it, really. And he says to Slim, I heard all the yelling, so I comes running. And by that time, Lenny's so scared, all he can think to do is just hold on. Now, we know before that Lenny likes to pet soft things. That's why he's so desperate to tend the rabbits. And he's got this girl's dress, and he hasn't intended to frighten her, but because it's soft and because he panics, and when he panics, he holds on to things, which is why all the mice die, because he panics and holds on to their heads and crushes their skulls and so on. That she cries rape, and all the men in the town come and hunt them out, and they have to hide in an irrigation ditch with only their heads above water until it's safe to come out. So we get to know a little bit more about the kind of trouble that Lenny gets into. And I'm sure you'll remember that foreshadowing is one of Steinbeck's key techniques. He's always giving us a little hint about something bigger which is going to happen later on. Obviously, this is quite a big hint about something which is going to happen later on. Lenny comes in with one of the little puppies that he's been given to raise up by Slim. Now, he shouldn't have taken it out of what they call the nest. They shouldn't have taken it away from the mother, but he's brought it into the bunkhouse. And he gets sent back by George, who treats him very firmly. And at which point Slim says, Jesus, he's just like a kid, ain't he? This is a really useful quotation for anything where you have to describe Lenny, describing him as just like a kid, which is he is childlike in everything that he does, which is why his relationship with George is one of very much a parent and child, authoritarian. He's always getting told what to do. So Slim realises that Lenny's got no harm in him, that he's not intentionally going to hurt anyone ever. Then we get to this issue of Candy's dog. And Carlson comes in and says, this dog, it stinks up the place. I don't like it. And he says, he ain't no good to you, Candy, and he ain't no good to himself. Why don't you shoot him, Candy? And it's the first time this idea is raised. You've got to kill this dog. Poor dog. You can't help it. You can't help it, can you? So he comes up with the idea that this is going to happen, and obviously Candy doesn't want it to happen because the dog is his only companion, his only friend. In the way that George and Lenny have got each other, Candy's got a dog. No one else on this ranch has got anybody that really is faithful to them or loyal to them. And Candy, it says, looked helplessly at Slim, for Slim's opinions were law. So Carlson's raised this idea, and Candy feels that if he can get Slim to say, no, don't shoot the dog, then the dog won't be shot, because Slim has that kind of power. Well, Slim doesn't do anything. And then it says Candy looked Candy looked for help from face to face, and no one helps him. No one says, no, give the dog another chance. So Carlson takes the dog. Candy says, all right, take him. And he did not look down at the dog at all. He can't bear to even take a last look at this dog. He loves it so much. It's so painful for him that the dog is being taken away. So Carlson says he's going to do it painlessly. He takes his gun, which is a Luger, and he says he's going to shoot it in the back of the head. And it won't even feel a thing. Again, foreshadowing on an epic scale. So it's really sad. In the meantime, there are some awkward conversations going on in the bunkhouse because people are trying to take the focus away from the fact that poor Candy's dog is outside being shot. So they start talking about other things, and Whit raises the subject of Curly's wife and saying, oh, she's a Lulu and she's got the eye. I've even seen her giving the stable buck the eye, really spreading nasty gossip, nasty rumours. We get quite a picture of what Whit is like, because as soon as he's talked about Curly's wife, he starts suggesting that George should go with them down to the brothel and, have a night out with a few whores. So he's not the kind of person that we think George should be associating with. We've got more faith in George as readers because we know that George is going to do the right thing. And he's always saying, no, me and Lenny got to make a stake. We got to save this money. And so to begin with, he isn't drawn and he says he's not interested. Right, the next thing that happens is Curly comes in looking for his wife, which is basically what Curly spends all his time doing. Can't trust her. So he's very, very aggressive, and he thinks that Slim, who's gone out to put some tar on a mule's hoof, is with his wife. And Whit and Carlson are very excited by this. They want to go out and see if there's going to be a fight. George, as the reader would hope, says, I'm not getting any mixed up in that. I'm staying right here. I don't want to get mixed up in nothing. But he does say about Curly's wife, she's going to make a mess. She's a jailbait all set on the trigger. That Curly got his work cut out for him. So again, another massive piece of foreshadowing, the idea that Curly's wife is going to bring about other people's downfall. So they all go out following the little fight because they want to see what Curly is going to do when he finds out where his wife is and whether or not Slim is with her. And so while they're in the bunkhouse, Lenny needs some reassurance, and he asks George to tell him the story again. So he's telling him the story about having a little place, living on the fat of the land. We have chickens and ducks and sheep and whatever. And what they hadn't realised is that Candy is listening to them, because everyone overlooks Candy. He's not very significant to any of them. He says to Lenny, George says to Lenny, we just live there. We belong there. And this is really the essence of the idea, having a place where they belong, which they can call their own, where something grows out of the ground, they can keep it for themselves and not always be living on the mercy of other people and not having any choice. And suddenly Candy is there saying, look, I've got some money. When I hurt my hand, when I lost my hand, they gave me a payoff. I've got $350. So he says to them, suppose I went in with you guys. I ain't much good, but I could cook and clean and hoe the garden some. So even though he's got these pathetic little offerings, that's all he can do, but he can give them the money. And it says they looked at each other amazed. This thing they had never really believed in was coming true. So it kind of tells us really that the dream is just a way of keeping going. Everybody has to have something to live for. You've got to have hope that if you keep working and you keep doing your hard graft and working on these awful places, something is going to get better in your life. Because what are we without hope? And suddenly, this thing that they had for the sake of having a hope and having a dream could actually be realistic. And it's a whole change in everything. George gets really excited. He's like, I bet we could swing her. I could go out there. I know a little place. We could get it started. You guys could go ahead. I could work another month. And it becomes this utopian vision of this perfect life, which could actually happen. Of course, Steinbeck doesn't let us, dwell on that for too long. It all goes sad again. One of Candy's big reasons for wanting to go in with them is, he says, you seen what they done to my dog tonight? Well, when they can me here, I wish somebody'd shoot me, but they won't do nothing like that. I won't have no place to go. So Candy knows that he's doomed to this lonely life, that he's got no one to look after him. Where's he going to go? There's no kind of social security. There's no council house that he can go and live in. There's not going to be a council-run nursing home that will look after him. He's literally not going to have anywhere to go. And he says, it would be better if when I'm past my best, someone does shoot me. Again, another bit of foreshadowing. And he obviously feels regret, and he says, I ought to have shot that dog myself, George. I shouldn't ought to have let no stranger shoot my dog. And this could be something that lodges in George's brain, because when we come to chapter 6, where George has to make that awful decision about what happens to Lenny, maybe that's what's going around in his brain. You don't want to let a stranger do it. You want to do it yourself, and you want to make sure it's done properly. And that's maybe why he does what he does to Lenny at the end of the book. Anyway, just as you think it's all going to go well, this is a Steinbeck novel, and in comes Curly. Curly's still looking for his wife. Slim's given him a bit of an earful, and so has Carlson, who's jumped on the bandwagon, because he's a bit mean and gets wanting to fight all the time. And Curly is looking for someone to take his rage out on, and he spots Lenny. And suddenly, and Lenny's sort of smiling because he's still thinking about the dream, and he's thinking about his puppies, and he's thinking about tending the rabbits. And suddenly it says, Curly's rage exploded. And he goes and he starts swinging for Lenny. And Lenny is not aggressive at all. He's very strong, but again, he's not a fighter. But he doesn't know any rules, as George says. And it says, Lenny covered his face with his huge paws and bleated in terror. Again, this idea of Lenny as being quite animalistic. But that he's frightened and he's not initiating anything, and he doesn't even fight back to begin with. And you get this classic moment of description where it says, Curly's fist was swinging when Lenny reached for it. The next minute, Curly was flopping like a fish on a line, and his closed fist was lost in Lenny's big paw. And it's this awful moment. I don't know if any of you saw the stage production, you probably won't, a few years ago in the West End in the Savoy Theatre, where they played this awful sound effect, and you heard or felt all the bones just breaking in Curly's hand because Lenny is so strong. And he does, and he's completely limp and he's weak. And they say to him, I think you got your hand caught in a machine. I don't think Lenny did this, because of course they know that Lenny will get sacked. And Curly is so ashamed of having been beaten in a fight that he doesn't want anyone to know either, so he goes along with it. And poor Lenny, he's been cut, his face is full of blood, his eyes are full of blood. But instead of worrying about that, all he's really worried about is, I can still tend the rabbits, George. And he says, of course you can, now go and wash your face. So this is very much a turning point. What happens in chapter 3 is that we go from this belief that everything is going to be okay to suddenly realizing that it's not. So you have a massive high and then you have a crushing low. As soon as Lenny has done this to him, Curly has got a motive for revenge. And because we know what Curly's like, the reader is anticipating from here on in that something is going to happen. It's going to mean that Curly gets his own back on Lenny. It's a sign of kind of how mercenary life is, that people are fighting, and this is relatively normal. It's not even an unusual event. The other men were really enjoying it. They were kind of shouting it on and encouraging the fight. And it is this idea that people who are alone and by themselves and isolated, they get mean because they want to fight all the time, because it's a way of making a connection with another person, which perhaps they wouldn't otherwise do. Right, so that's chapter 3. I'm going to move on to chapter 4.